The mysterious death of a grandmother whose remains were discovered just a few miles from where she planned to visit her daughter.
It's hard. We want to know how she died and how she came to be there.
Her belongings were found scattered in woods in Cumbria. Can you tell us who took her there? Hello and welcome to Crimewatch. We are live for the next hour and I'm surrounded by detectives, all hoping that you're going to be able to help them tonight. We're going to have more on the strange death of Betty Brown soon, but before we do, let's take a look at tonight's other cases. We've got the mum who was cleaning up after a party for her 11-year-old daughter's school friends when a masked gang burst into her home.
Somebody shouts out, "Tie the kids up and drown them." So obviously I panicked and I remember begging and pleading, saying, "Please no, please no, please no."
Do you want those kids to get drowned?
No, please don't hurt them.
Truly terrifying. Police in Brighton want to know who raped a schoolgirl as she made her way home from a Valentine's Day meal this February.
I wasn't really wary at all. I just wanted to get home, go to sleep. It's just the fear of what's going to happen afterwards.
And the unidentified human remains found on a building site in central Manchester. Detectives believe the woman was killed up to 40 years ago and have now reconstructed what they think she looked like. Can you tell us who she is? We've also got some great news on previous cases, including a life sentence for the murder of a taxi driver, 20 years for a paedophile, and a minimum of 4 years in prison for this attempted rapist whose arrest we filmed just 3 days after our reconstruction of his attack. And Rav is here with his latest collection of wanted faces and CCTV.
That's right, and amongst this lot, we've got people wanted for GBH, fraud and firearms offences.
And Matthew, what have you got for us tonight?
It's the shocking story of a brutal murder in Preston in Lancashire back in 1975. The victim was 26-year-old Joan Harrison, who was thought to have been one of the Yorkshire Ripper's earliest victims.
Mr. Sutcliffe. I'm Detective Chief Superintendent Wilf Brooks from Lancashire Police. I've come about the Joan Harrison murder. Did you kill Joan Harrison?
Who really killed Joan would remain secret for another 33 years until a chance stop by traffic police led to the unravelling of this sadistic killer's true identity.
Now we begin with the death of 56-year-old grandmother Betty Brown. Her badly decomposed remains were found in Cumbrian woods, 90 miles away from where she lived in Edinburgh. The location of her body was just a few miles away from where her daughter lives, and it's thought she may have been on her way to make a surprise visit. Detectives urgently need to know how she ended up in the woods and who might have taken her there.
She was just my sister, Betty. You know, I just loved her, really loved her, and I just miss her so much.
She was a great mum. She done everything for me. She loved her grandchildren.
In January, 8 months after she went missing, the skeletal remains of Betty Brown were found here in these woods in Cumbria, 90 miles from her home. How she got here remains a complete mystery, and now police need your help to piece together her final fateful journey.
Betty lived alone in Edinburgh, but was very much a family woman.
Betty and I had a really close relationship. There was 10.5 years gap in her ages. When she was a wee one, she was a wee devilish one, and she wouldn't sleep. And I used to get left to sort of rock Betty back and forward till she slept. And I used to sing to her and things like that.
My mum was a very fun-loving person. She liked her hobbies, going out walking, swimming, just an all-in-all lovely person, really. She loved the grandchildren. She was always there when her grandchildren were born.
I'll never see her again, and it's sad. But I've never had a chance to say goodbye to her. Sorry, I'm going to get upset.
So what do detectives know about Betty's movements on the day she went missing, Friday, the 28th of May? That morning, she left her house in the west of Edinburgh with her bags packed for a trip. It's likely she was beginning a journey to Longtown in Cumbria to visit her daughter, Sarah. At 11:30, she boarded the number 3 bus into town. She's seen here on CCTV.
You know, she knew the times of the buses and, you know, where to get on the bus and where to get off the bus, because she used to travel all the time down to see us.
By midday, we know that Betty was here in Edinburgh city centre. Records show that she withdrew money from a cash point on Nicholson Street. While this is the last thing we know for sure about her movements that day, it's extremely likely she then made her way to this bus stop to catch the X95 to Longtown.
There were buses at 12:05 and at 1:05 p.m. Detectives need to know which one she caught and who else was on the X95 that afternoon. 3 hours later, the bus would have reached Longtown on its way down to Carlisle.
This was Betty's usual stop. If she was here in Longtown that day, police need to know who saw her and who spoke to her.
I can't imagine her walking from Longtown, where she would have got off the bus, round to that area on her own. She's either accepted a lift from someone, or she's maybe nipped into the pub when she got off the bus and got speaking to someone in the pub. I don't know. It's, you know, you go through all the scenarios in your mind. I just feel there's something happened somewhere along the lines, and I don't think Betty was on her own.
Her body was found in an area of scrubland a mile outside of Longtown. The detective leading the case believes she was murdered.
So this area here is where you found Betty, isn't it?
Yeah, she was hidden in the undergrowth and her body was badly decomposed. Some of her clothing was scattered around the top of where the body was found, but the distinctive black Aldi bags were found some 80 yards away. That leads me to believe that it's highly unlikely this was a suicide or she died of natural causes.
And for Betty's family, not knowing is adding to the pain, adding to the anguish, isn't it?
Absolutely. They are suffering, and we need to find some answers for them to relieve that suffering and let them move on with their lives.
We just want to lay her to rest, you know, so she's in, you know, she's at peace.
It's not the not knowing who she was with, who she last spoke to, and what happened to her that particular day. You know, it's just, it's really, really heartbreaking.
Yes, heartbreaking. DCI Jeff Ashton joins me now. The family clearly want to know what happened. You think it was murder, do you?
It's a real possibility, Kirsty. If we start with those distinctive black Aldi bags, they were full of things that contained things for a weekend away, you know, pyjamas, personal effects. She withdrew some cash. The location where she was found, it's a real unfriendly location full of nettles. There's no reason for her to go there.
Right.
And things like that make us believe this isn't suicide.
What about your post-mortem? Inconclusive, was it?
Unfortunately, yes, inconclusive. We're still conducting a number of tests, but because of the decomposition of Betty's body, those are taking longer than normal. She did have some damage to her ribs, though, which is very interesting. It could be that they were sustained as a result of an attack.
So given that so far the forensics haven't given you that much, it's witnesses this is all about, is it?
Witnesses, the public, will fill in the gaps that we don't know, starting with the Nicholson Street in Edinburgh, the X95 bus. Were you on it on that May the 28th, Friday the May the 28th last year? Were you in Longtown when she possibly got off the bus or was walking along the 607 road, 6071 road, sorry, towards Gretna? And the two people you see on the CCTV, the number 3 bus, they got off with her. Did they see her meet anyone? Did she say anything about where she was going? It's important to come forward so we can fill in the gaps.
Jeff, for now, thanks very much. You've heard what DCI Ashton is looking for then. If you think you can help Betty Brown's family find out what happened to her, then please do call now. It's the usual number, of course. It's 0500 600 600. Now here's Rav with his first batch of wanted faces.
And first on the board tonight is Ang Zhang Du, right here. 52-year-old Du is wanted in connection with the murder of a family of 4 in Northampton just 3 weeks ago. Zing, Jeff, Helen and Alice Ding were stabbed to death in their home on April the 29th. That's the day of the royal wedding. Du, who was Mrs Ding's ex-business partner, is 5'9" tall and often wears a baseball cap to hide his bald patch. Now, he's seen here on CCTV in Northampton bus station. He's now possibly in London, but could be anywhere. Now, if you have any information about Du's whereabouts, please call 999 immediately. Do not approach him. Next is 67-year-old Richard John Ramsey Burrows, and he's wanted in connection with the sexual assault of young boys which took place during the 1980s at a care home where Burrows was working as a housemaster. Burrows was due to stand trial in 1998 but absconded and has not been seen since. Now, this is an age-progressed image of how he may look now. Burrows has links to Cheshire and the Midlands and may now own a barge. Number 3, over here, is Robert James Kerr. The 52-year-old is wanted by police in North Yorkshire for defrauding a vicar of more than £1,000 after falsely claiming he was a member of the army who needed money to pay for a flight. Kerr, who uses aliases including Andrew Johnson, has a Northern Irish accent and has a tattoo of a tombstone with the words "Rest in peace, Mum" on his right arm. And finally, for now, is this guy, 41-year-old Peter James Hanna. Now, this nasty piece of work was convicted of slashing a man with learning difficulties across the face and back with a knife. Hanna, who has links with Merseyside, Manchester, Chester and North Wales, has several scars, including one on his left cheek, on his left hand and one on his neck. He's considered very dangerous, so please do not approach him. Just call the police straight away. Now, all of tonight's wanted faces are on the website, which is bbc.co.uk/Crimewatch, sorry, and if you know where they are, 0500 600 600, or you can text us on 3399, type crime space and then your message. Really important to leave that space where your message just won't get through.
Our next case is a violent burglary at the house of a mother and her 11-year-old daughter. It took place in Hertfordshire. The gang's plan was as simple as it was brutal: to beat and threaten the family into submission.
I obviously don't feel as safe as I used to. I used to feel very safe. I'm always wondering what's out there, or if somebody's watching.
This is Lorraine Mitchell's home in Essendon in rural Hertfordshire. It's where she loved to host parties for friends and family. But it was on one such occasion last summer that celebrations would end with a shocking onslaught of violence.
You want anything, just help yourself, won't you? Can't tempt you? Oh, I'll see you've already got some. Here you go, guys.
It was my daughter's last year at a primary school, and I hosted the Year 6 leavers party. They normally get a hall and it costs quite a lot of money and everything, so I said, look, I'll do the venue. It was good weather, luckily.
You right there, guys? I think I'll get you. You fine?
It was good fun. It was a really good day.
See you soon. Thank you for coming.
The last one left at about 11:15.
See you then. Bye. Yeah, see you.
It had been a really good day. One friend was having a sleepover.
Okay, girls, you sit and watch some TV and I'll go and clear up and I'll come through soon. All right.
I just started clearing up from outside. The back door was open and the doors out to the pool area.
Get down! Right!
initially it didn't seem real, and I said something to the words of, for God's sake, do you think that's funny? I thought it was a practical joke.
Right, get up! Get up! Get up! Get up!
He gave me a couple more belts, and he just kept asking, where is he? What's your name? And I said, Lorraine.
What's your name? Lorraine! What's your name?
And he gave me another whack and said, no, your name, obviously meaning Mitchell, my surname. So I gave him the name Mitchell.
Lorraine Mitchell!
What made it even worse was I knew I didn't have anything to give them. If I'd have had something to give them, then I could have got rid of them, but I didn't have anything. And that's what made it even worse, because I couldn't stop it.
Maybe you just tell me what you need.
Even though she pleaded with the gang, Lorraine was still repeatedly punched and whipped with a length of electric cable.
Where's the money? Get up!
Obviously, I was in pain, but all I could think about was, oh my God, where are the kids?
What was that? I don't know.
I already knew at this stage, because they'd already been hitting me, they were obviously capable of a lot of violence towards me on my own, and would they do that to the children?
Where's your dad?
I don't know.
Where's your dad?
He's not here.
You two, come with me. Come on. You're coming with me. Move!
And then somebody shouts out, tie the kids up and drown them. So obviously I panicked, and I remember begging and pleading, saying, please no, please no.
Get over it. Right, listen, if you don't tell me where the money is, those kids are going in the pool and they're getting drowned. Where's the money?
One of them walked back through the kitchen past me with my daughter and her friend, and he ushered them through. He wasn't hitting them, but he just ushered them through, and my daughter was saying, Mummy, Mummy. And I don't know where he took them at this point.
Through there, through outside, outside! Will you shut her up? Do you want those kids to get drowned?
No, please don't hurt them.
But get in there, sit down, shut up. Right, you stay over there, keep them quiet. Just stay where you are.
They dragged me to the garage, like kind of by my hair and my top of my jumper.
Right, get in there, get.
I said, there's a safe there, but there's nothing in it.
Where is the key?
I don't know where the key is.
Go on, just try and get it open. Move.
And he had an axe, and he was trying to axe into the safe, which obviously wasn't going to happen. And the axe was rotten, so the head fell off of it, which made him even more angry. And he was just like, he was possessed. He was going crazy, because I think they thought that was their pot of gold.
Move.
One of them took me outside, sat me down with the children.
Sit down, shut up.
And he said, don't look at me, look at the children.
It's all right now, here, okay?
And I heard my car drive away.
Hello? Yes, Lorraine Mitchell,
I've just been burgled by a load of people in masks and stuff, and they're beating me up and threatening my kids. They hurt me big time, they're beating me up badly.
They were so pent up and angry and evil. If they were capable of doing that to a woman on her own with 2 kids in the house, then they'd be capable of anything. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, and they don't deserve to be out there and given the chance to do it again.
The expensive car the gang stole from the driveway was dumped just a few hundred yards down the road, and they stole little of significant value during the raid. So what were the gang really after, and why did they use so much violence towards a mother at home with 2 young children? We need to know who they are and why they did it.
Tie the kids up and drown them, they said. Despicable. Well, Detective Inspector Stuart Orton joins me now. Thanks for joining us, Stuart. So, when the gang got into the house, everything seemed very chaotic and a bit odd.
It did, Kirsty, yes. The motive for the attack is still unclear because they didn't actually specify what they wanted. They initially seemed to be clarifying that they were in the right house, but then they made a half-hearted attempt to break into the safe, and they didn't have the right equipment to do that.
Maybe a couple of distinctive things it's worth mentioning. There was they almost looked like homemade balaclavas and also a pair of gloves.
Yeah, all of them were wearing gloves, gardening gloves. We've got an image of those gloves.
Let's talk about the level of violence then, Stuart. I mean, to actually handle this is horrifying. This woman was whipped with a length of electrical cable. I mean, tell us more about this thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crude design. It's clearly been adapted to cause a maximum amount of injury. But it's the psychological scars of the threats to drown the children. They're going to take the longest to heal. I
mean, actually, we should, yes, the emotional injuries are great, but also what she suffered is appalling.
Horrendous injuries, yes.
What about what they took then?
Yeah, they took, one of the offenders in particular took a Kipling bag belonging to Lorraine's daughter.
There were also, I mean, if anybody then whose daughter was given one of these, that's important, but briefly also some jewellery. Yeah,
relatively small amounts of jewellery and a relatively small amount of cash was taken.
Do you think the answers lie locally, Stuart?
I do, yeah. Lorraine describes the offenders as having a local accent. Her husband is a prominent businessman in the local area, and I believe this may have raised the family profile.
OK, Stuart, thanks very much for now. You saw how horrific that was. If you know anything, I would urge you, please, to call us tonight. 0500 600 600. Now here's Rav with some criminals caught on camera.
And we start with an appalling assault on a female bus driver at Euston Bus Garage in London in January. The female driver of the number 59 bus is forced to stop after a man starts to kick the doors as she enters the depot. When she opens the door, the man gets on and savagely punches her in the face in a violent and unprovoked attack. The attacker left the driver badly traumatised with cuts and bruises to her face. Name, please. It's February, and these two are on a night out at this bookies in Littlehampton in West Sussex. They soon claim there's a problem with one of the gambling machines and call the female shop assistant over before one of them suddenly pulls out a knife and there's a brief struggle. Thankfully, the assistant isn't hurt, but their gamble pays off and they escape with the cash box. But it seems this duo, one of whom is dressed like the Where's Wally character with thick glasses and a stripy woolly hat, really are a pair of Wallies after all, because they never actually managed to open the cash box and later abandoned it, still full of money. So tell us where Wally and his mate are tonight. OK, if you want to see that a lot again, they're also on the website. And if you know who any of them are, please give us a call, 0500 600 600, or you can text us 63399, type crime, space, and then your message.
Now, Matthew and Rav have got some news on some previous cases.
Well, we start tonight with some excellent news about a case we featured last October. We appealed for information after a woman was sexually assaulted while walking her dog at the Elscar Reservoir near Barnsley in South Yorkshire. Well, just 3 days after the programme, our cameras were given exclusive access as 48-year-old David Brian Thompson was arrested at his home in Rotherham. Well, last month, Thompson was given an indeterminate prison sentence with a recommendation he serve at least 4 years. Great news.
And next, this footage shows Raymond John Gunnell being booked back into custody at a police station in Kent after being extradited from Spain. The 41-year-old had been on the run for 10 years after breaching the terms of his parole. He was originally sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his 19-year-old girlfriend in Grimsby in 1989. Gunnell was arrested in Spain after a tip-off from a Crimewatch viewer who saw him on a Wanted Faces board back in January last year. He'll now serve the remainder of his sentence in prison. Nice one.
Now, officers from London are appealing again for information on a case we featured in July. Taxi driver Michael Uche Okonkwo-Nwasu was attacked just before 5 a.m. on Saturday the 19th of June last year. He was found badly injured just yards from his minicab in the Abbey Wood area of southeast London, and he died later that day. Well, tonight we have new CCTV of a man police want to trace in connection with the incident. They want to identify this man wearing a red top, possibly an England football shirt, and white trainers running down the parade of shops in the Eynsham Drive area, close to where Uche was attacked. If you're the man in the footage or know who he is, or if you have any information about what happened, call the usual number or the incident room on 0208 721 4054. There is a £20,000 reward for information leading to a conviction.
Right, still to come then. The A-level student raped as she walked home from a meal out on Valentine's Day in Brighton. And I wonder, do you know the woman in this artwork? It was painted by convicted killer John Sweeney, and police are now concerned for the model's safety. We also need your help to identify this murder victim, whose face has been reconstructed by forensic anthropologists. And Matthew is looking back at how detectives finally caught the man responsible for the 1975 murder of Joan Harrison.
Yes, it was a crime linked to the Yorkshire Ripper, but it was only after a chance arrest decades later and a deathbed confession that the case was finally solved.
I would like to put the record straight. I can't go on with the guilt. I have lived with it for over 20 years.
So that's all coming very soon. But first, Matthew's got the latest on what's been happening on the phones so far.
Yeah, the phone's really busy on all of our main appeals. Let's start with the Betty Brown investigation, and Jeff, who's here with his team. What's come in, Jeff?
A number of calls come in, some really useful information about buses and stuff, but I must ask the public, it's the gaps that need filling in. How did Betty get there? Did they speak to her on the X95? What did she do when she got to Longtown? How did she get in that wood? You know, she didn't just get there magically. How did she get there? We need to know.
Yeah, lots to find out about. If you know something, anything, please call. Kirsty.
Thanks, Matthew. I should remind you, of course, the phones are open until midnight tomorrow night. For now, Rav's got more of his wanted faces.
Right, first in this section is Wrong Zhu down here. The 46-year-old is wanted for conspiracy to manage brothels in Oxford and Ealing in West London. Zhu, who uses the alias Gigi Zhang, speaks broken but good English and also has links to Uxbridge. Police think she may well have set up another massage parlour by now. Over here is Robert Victor Fred Dimmock. The 54-year-old is wanted because he owes quite a bit of money to the courts, £5.4 million to be exact, which he was ordered to pay following a conviction for money laundering in 2008. Dimmock, who has links to Doncaster, Hull, Ireland and much of Europe, is also known by the nickname SAS Bob. Number 7 over here is Havid Ramat Ullah. The 52-year-old is a convicted paedophile who abused young children while working as an imam at a mosque in Hertfordshire. He's wanted by police for failing to register as a sex offender. Ullah, who has a scar on the left side of his neck, has links to South Wales, Hertfordshire and London. He may well be teaching at a mosque. And the final face tonight is this guy, Joel Solomon Williams. He's wanted in connection with an attempted murder after a handgun was fired at a crowd of people outside a nightclub in Sheffield last October. 28-year-old Williams, who is known by the nickname Juvie or Juvenile, also has links with Nottingham. Williams is considered dangerous, so please don't approach, just call the police immediately. 0500 600 600 is our number if you recognise any of them, or you can text us on 63399. And remember, they'll stay online until they're caught.
On Valentine's Day in February, a young student had enjoyed a meal out with a friend in Brighton. But her night would end in a terrifying attack, during which she was raped. To protect her identity, the victim's words are spoken by an actor.
This is Brighton, a lively city with many popular attractions and a diverse nightlife. And on Valentine's Day this year, it was as busy as ever. But for one young woman, her evening out would come to a terrifying end.
I had met up with a friend for supper because it was Valentine's evening.
We'll treat your mum and auntie here after. Well, they've eaten.
I think so. I think they've gone to a restaurant somewhere. Oh, can I borrow your phone a second? Yeah, sure.
Left mine at home.
Well done.
Just need to text my dad, tell him I'm on my way.
Oh, fair enough. It's a shame you can't come to the club tonight.
Yeah. Right, done. Cool, let's go.
All my friends went out clubbing and I'm not 18, so I couldn't go. So I just went back home, decided to walk back home alone.
It was a half-hour walk home, one she had done many times before.
I wasn't really wary at all. I just wanted to get home, go to sleep, a bit tired.
Her route took her away from the seafront, around the Seven Dials roundabout, and north up Dyke Road towards the park. But by this time, she wasn't alone.
And I was aware that there was a man behind me, quite far away from me, so I just crossed the road. I had my music in, I didn't really hear anything. And I got dragged across the road, and I couldn't really breathe.
But although she had been physically overwhelmed, she was already thinking on her feet. She took an unusually brave step, one which would reveal vital information about her attacker. She started to question him.
Tell me your name.
It's just the fear of what's going to happen afterwards.
Tell me your name.
David! Now shut up! Shut up!
But he wouldn't let her go, and eventually he raped her. A horrendous ordeal in itself, but the victim was also terrified as to what he might do next.
And I thought maybe if I'm really calm about it, he'll let me go. And something must have worked because I managed to run off. You hear about people doing self-defense and stuff, but I just couldn't do anything in that situation.
I need your help to catch the person who did this. He's a dangerous man who followed and attacked a very young woman, a woman who is still struggling to come to terms with what he did to her.
It doesn't feel real. It didn't really feel real at all. It still doesn't really.
Really horrendous. Well, we're joined by DCI Trevor Bowles from Sussex Police, who we saw in the reconstruction there. A terrifying attack on, we have to remember, a very young woman here.
Kirsty, a really brazen attack alongside a busy road shortly after midnight on the 15th of February this year. Quite awful and terrifying ordeal.
Let's take a look at something important. It's crucial CCTV, you think. Tell us what we're seeing here.
Yes, we're seeing here some CCTV that was taken just south of the attack site and very shortly before it. This is a man who I really need the viewers to focus on, his clothing, the way he's walking. If you know this man, please call.
Particularly brave, this young woman, because she made the decision, it must have been very tough, to start talking to her attacker.
Yes, she did. She asked his name, and he said his name was David. And he also mentioned the word cliché on 2 occasions. We're keeping an open mind about what this may mean and whether his name is actually David.
Yes, indeed. I was going to say that because he was, she thinks, quite heavily European accented, and of course his name might not be David or David. You do have something, though, that's far more definite. Tell me about DNA.
Yes, we do have a DNA profile which has been checked against the national database. It doesn't currently give a match, but that's very important, and it should give callers confidence when they're calling in that we can eliminate anyone very easily.
Absolutely. If you've got suspicions, then come forward with your suspicions. This man needs to be caught. If you know anything, let me give you the number again. There it is, 0500 600 600. Indeed, if you've been the victim of crime. Let me tell you about the victim support line. You can call them anytime, 0845 30 30 900. It's time now for some more news on cases that you've already helped with.
We start with an update on an appeal from last June. 22-year-old care worker Fionn Wyn Roberts was murdered as she made her way home from a night out in Porthmadog in North Wales in April 2010. 53-year-old Iestyn Davis was subsequently charged with Fionn's murder, and last month he was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison. The judge described Davis as calculating and devious.
Now, we've got news on the murder of another taxi driver. Mohammed Arshad from Birmingham was stabbed to death in his cab in a country lane in July 2009. We featured 2 appeals asking for you to identify this man, caught on CCTV just after the murder. Viewers helped name him as Andrew Bayliss, and last month the 28-year-old was convicted of murder and sentenced to a minimum of 30 years in prison. A great result.
Finally, remember this wanted face we featured on the board last September. Police were searching for 56-year-old James Cruikshank Boys after he failed to turn up at court to face charges of sexually abusing girls while working at a Sussex care home in the 1980s. Well, thanks to Crimewatch viewers, he was found and earlier this month sentenced to 20 years in prison after admitting 2 counts of rape and 13 of indecent assault. Many, many thanks for all of those crucial calls.
Now, take a look at this. It is, I have to say, no ordinary e-fit. In fact, it is a painting by a convicted killer. And police are concerned that something may have happened to the model who posed for him. The artist is John Sweeney, who last month was sentenced to life in prison for killing 2 women, Paula Fields and Melissa Halstead. We featured the investigation into their deaths just over a year ago. And the detective who led that inquiry was DCI Howard Groves. He's here again tonight to explain the significance of the painting. Before we get to that, just fill us in a little bit, remind us of the background of this case.
Sweeney killed Paula and Melissa. He removed their hands and heads, and then he dumped them in canals. A joint investigation was conducted between the UK and Dutch police officers, during which a large quantity of artwork was recovered. And we know that Sweeney was consistent in ensuring that he sort of documented his life through his artwork, and that's primarily the reason why we're here tonight.
Now, let's start with 3 women that you are particularly interested in. Here they are here. Take us through them.
Yes,
First of all...
Irani, we believe that she was from Brazil and was in her mid-40s at the time, between 1996 and 97, that she had a relationship with Sweeney. Then we had somebody called Maria, who was from Colombia, and she would have been about 10 years younger, in her mid-30s. And she also was in a relationship with him for about 6 months. And then the 3rd individual is a female who we know was studying to be a nurse. She was an avid churchgoer, and then in the early 80s, she left to go to Switzerland to work as a nurse. And it may be that these individuals are alive and well, but obviously we need to ensure that that is the case.
And what about this woman here?
1985 London is depicted on that artwork of Sweeney. One strange thing is that he normally wouldn't identify who's drawn or painted, and he hasn't under these circumstances. So it could very well be that he took that from a magazine, and therefore there's no special issues as far as we're concerned. But we would like to try and identify that individual if we can, in order for us to sort of fill in certain gaps in relation to the investigation.
OK, so it's a highly detailed investigation, and all of the details you've given us tonight, and a little more detail besides, is on our website, so people should log on if they want to just look at that information. Correct. Thanks, Howard. Did you know John Sweeney then in the 1980s, the 1990s? Or do you recognise the descriptions of any of these women? If so, please do pick up the phone. Now, Rav has got some more CCTV.
Yep, and we start this time with some cash point crooks. This is Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire, where this gentleman is about to use the supermarket cash machine. As he enters his PIN number, he is ambushed by 2 men when one of them starts waving a newspaper in front of his face. While the victim is distracted, the other man manages to withdraw £200. The thieves casually start to walk off, but they've been spotted by the CCTV operator, as well as the store's security guard. They decide to make a run for it, almost getting run over in the process. These men deliberately chose someone they thought was an easy target. Don't let them do it again. Tell us who they are. Inside Ham Hill service station in Snodland in Kent, also in February. A man walks in and approaches the cash desk, wanting to pay for some cigarette papers. But his good intentions go up in smoke, because as the cashier opens the till, he leans over the counter and helps himself to the contents. Stub out his criminal ways and name this money-grabbing thief tonight. Some people will do anything to get on TV. Take a look at this pair hanging around an office block in central London after midnight on a Friday in September. Once inside and in front of the lights and camera, the action can really start. It's like upstairs, downstairs as they try and find what they're after. Once they do, things become a bit more chuckle vision. To me, to you, to me. That safe looks heavy, and so it should. It contained a haul of gold jewellery and watches worth more than 50 grand. So don't ruin their chances of stardom. Let's have their names so we can tell everyone who they are. You know what to do. 0500 600 600, or you can text us on 63399, type crime, space, and then your message.
Now, you might remember last February we appealed for your help to identify the female remains of a murder victim. She was found by workmen on a building site in Manchester in an area locally known as Angel Meadows. Well, more than a year later, still not known who this woman is, but there is now a lot more information which police hope could reveal who she is and how she ended up there. DCI Joanne Rawlinson is leading the investigation, and she joins me now. Thanks for joining us, Joanne. Just remind us of the background to this case.
The remains were found in January 2010. We know that this woman suffered a blunt force physical assault just prior to her death. As a result of the appeal last year, we had a number of lines of inquiry, which we've now followed up, but unfortunately we still don't know her identity.
OK, you and your team have been doing a huge amount of work on the skeleton itself. What have you managed to find out?
We've been working closely with forensic anthropologists. We now know that she was aged 18 to 30 years. She's most likely European origin, between 5'3" and 5'6", and that she would have been a modern-day size 12. We now know that her upper right first premolar tooth was missing, so that would have been obvious when she smiled. We've also carried out carbon testing on her teeth and bones, and that leads us to believe that she was now born between 1950 and 1954. We believe that she was murdered in 1970s or the early 1980s.
It's really incredible that you can be that specific, and really useful information. You've also done this, again, I mean, really impressive facial reconstruction. Tell us about that.
Yes, it's a forensic reconstruction. I'm hoping that people tonight, I'm urging them to have a close look at her face and see if they can recognise her. We do have this lady's DNA, so that if anyone believes that she may be a relative, we can easily establish that there's any family links.
And what's this about, this picture here?
Yes, we've used a little bit of artistic licence with this with regard to the hair and the eyebrows, but I'm hoping that this image, together with the model head, will jog someone's memory.
Yeah, and together with all the other jigsaw pieces. I mean, that's the thing. There are a lot of details. If people put them all together along with this, then it could be the key. What about what was found with the skeleton?
We actually found this pinafore dress. We now know that this was cheaply made. It was manufactured between 1973 and 1976. Okay. It would have been widely available on market stalls and in high street shops. We also found a skinny rib blue jumper and a pair of tights. What we can say is that our victim was not wearing the pinafore or the tights at the time that she was found, which leads us to suspect that it might be a sexually motivated attack.
And the car carpet, just briefly, could be really important.
Yes, we've found some mid-blue carpet which was cut into 9 individual pieces. Very distinctively, we believe that they're cut to fit a vehicle. We now suspect that that vehicle is a Ford Cortina. OK, so lots of really detailed information. Let's hope it gets your result tonight. Thank you.
Joanne, for now, thanks very much. Do you recognise the woman? Do you know what happened to her? If so, please do call us here tonight. The number is 0500 600 600. And again, you can find out lots more information, lots of that detail. It's heavy on detail on the website. Now, if you have ever wondered when or whether detectives ever give up on these sorts of investigations, then our next case says a great deal. It goes all the way back to 1975, to the murder of a young woman in Preston, in Lancashire. The inquiry at the time was huge. It involved nearly 200 detectives who interviewed around 30,000 people. One of them was, in fact, the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe. But it would be another 33 years before the police would know for sure who really killed Joan Harrison.
On a cold November morning in 1975, the body of a woman was found in a derelict garage in the Avenham area of Preston. Her brutal murder would become one of Lancashire's most notorious and longest-running cases, lasting over 3 decades and leading detectives on a trail to one of Britain's most infamous serial killers.
But now there is no doubt that the Ripper has claimed his latest victim.
What have we got? Murder boss.
But now detectives can finally close the file on this gruelling 35-year murder mystery.
We've got a name.
Joan Mary Harrison.
Joan was a 26-year-old young mother when she met her death. She lived in and around Preston for most of her life. I think her family would forgive me for saying that she'd fallen on hard times. She was addicted to alcohol. We know she was addicted to cough mixtures. And I think life in 1970s Preston would have been pretty tough for Joan.
On the night of her murder, Joan was last seen near the centre of Preston, looking for a late-night drink. It was the last time she was seen alive. 2 days later, Joan was discovered by a passerby. She was laying face down, partially clothed, with her coat and boots richly placed over her body. The man tasked with leading the investigation was Detective Superintendent Wilf Brooks.
Well, we know that when Mr. Brooks went into that garage, he would have been faced with a shocking murder scene. It was clear that Joan had suffered extensive head injuries. It's more than likely she'd suffered a sexual assault, and she had suffered a significant bite mark to her body.
The barbaric details of her murder shocked the community. Whoever murdered Joan was an extremely violent and dangerous man. The investigation that followed would become one of the biggest in Lancashire's history. The only forensics available at the time was blood grouping, and samples at the scene reveal the killer could have an extremely rare blood type. So police concentrated their efforts on men with a history of violence who also matched that specific blood group. But by July 1976, the exhaustive investigation was no nearer catching Joan's killer. With no new major leads, the investigation was wound down. Joan's killer had slipped through the net. But 3 years later, Joan's murder would suddenly be thrust back into the spotlight.
I'll ask you what you think about this latest Ripper attack.
It just worries me sick, really. I will never go out on my own at night.
As the Yorkshire Ripper spread terror across the north of England, West Yorkshire police received letters and a tape claiming to be from the killer, taunting the police and naming Joan Harrison's 1975 murder in Preston as one of his. Not only did he claim responsibility for killing her, but saliva on the letter's envelope revealed that he had the same rare blood type that had been left at the Joan Harrison murder scene. It was enough to convince Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield, the man leading the Ripper inquiry.
I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started.
In the summer of 1979, with Detective Wilf Brooks of Lancashire Police by his side, George Oldfield announced for the first time that he thought this was the Yorkshire Ripper and Joan Harrison was another one of his victims. But what the public didn't know was the man sitting next to George Oldfield had serious reservations that the murders were linked.
I understand from Mr. Brooks that he had actually met prior to the press conference with George Oldfield and expressed some doubt that the Joan Harrison case was actually connected to the Yorkshire Ripper case.
Sutcliffe, covered by a blanket, was then rushed.
But in January 1981, with Peter Sutcliffe in custody and the letters and tape finally discredited as a hoax, Detective Brooks got the chance to ask the Ripper face to face.
Mr. Sutcliffe, I'm Detective Chief Superintendent Wilf Brooks from Lancashire Police. I've come about the Joan Harrison murder. You've already confessed to the others. Did you kill Joan Harrison?
No. No, I didn't do her.
Sutcliffe had been ruled out of the Joan Harrison investigation, and detectives were back to square one. It would be a further 29 years before the true identity of Joan's killer would finally be revealed.
Murder inquiries are never closed, and in this particular case, the constabulary has been determined to bring it to a conclusion. Lancashire's worked very closely with the Forensic Science Service to unravel what has always been a very complex forensic picture.
From 1997, new DNA techniques were able to conclusively rule out key suspects in the murder, including Peter Sutcliffe and John Humble, the hoaxer found to have sent the Ripper letters and tape. Then, in 2010, after identifying a number of different DNA profiles, the team finally had a breakthrough.
The key was to be able to look at the photographic records of the scene and the forensic notes. It quickly became obvious, looking at the evidence holistically, that one particular DNA profile stood out as being potentially that of the killer.
And when they loaded that profile onto the DNA database, they got a hit. 2 years earlier, a man had been arrested for a drink driving offence in Leeds and his DNA placed on the database.
That man was 60-year-old Christopher Smith.
When detectives looked into Smith's background, they discovered that Joan Harrison's murder was only the beginning.
We could see a man whose offending behaviour had increased considerably in the years from 1981 onwards, become increasingly violent, particularly towards women.
In 1981, Smith subjected a teenager to a vicious attack which bore shocking similarities to Joan's death.
Shut up now! Be quiet!
2 years later, Smith stabbed and killed his first wife and their unborn child in a furious dispute.
Well, by 1985, Smith was married for a second time, and again an incredibly volatile relationship. And during the course of that marriage, we do know that he pushed her through a window when she was 7 months pregnant. We now have a man who was very violent, described by his own family as being violent, a boastful, aggressive man.
But how did Joan Harrison become one of his victims?
We still don't know for absolute certain, but what is certain is that during 1975, Smith served a period of imprisonment within HMP Preston, and it's more than likely he was actually released to a hostel nearby. And we do know now that John used to frequent that hostel.
Remarkably, whilst again serving time, Smith had actually been interviewed as part of the original investigation.
Smith had been interviewed in the months following Joan's death because he had stolen a lady's handbag. But at that time, it wasn't apparent that he was a violent man. He just presented as a petty thief, and as a consequence, he was discounted from the inquiry.
With the pieces of the jigsaw falling into place, all detectives needed now was Smith himself. But just 6 days after his arrest for drink driving, he was dead.
Smith died in 2008 after a long battle against cancer. Now, of course, as a senior investigator, it is some considerable personal regret that he didn't have a chance to stand trial for this terrible crime.
However, when detectives recovered some of Smith's belongings, among them, hidden away in a drawer, was a scrawled 3-page note.
I would like to put the record straight. I can't go on with the guilt. I have lived with it for over 20 years.
We found a note, which to my mind is clearly a confession note. And it's significant for me that he wrote that letter the day before he died. He talks about being remorseful for things that he's done, and he's clearly concerned about the law catching up with him.
After all these years, racked with guilt and dying of cancer, Smith finally confessed, begging forgiveness for his terrible crime.
There's no question that had Smith been alive today, he would have been charged with Joan Harrison's murder, and I've every confidence he would have been convicted of her murder. And I can only try to imagine the sense of sadness that Joan's family have carried over all these years, and I truly hope it brings some sense of closure for their tragic loss.
What a lot of twists and turns, and finally, after 3 decades, an answer.
Finally, it was a massive investigation, thousands interviewed and swabbed, but never a breakthrough. This case became so entwined with the Yorkshire Ripper inquiry because of the blind alley of the hoax. In one of the first letters to George Oldfield, it taunted him. It said, "Up to 8 now, you say 7, remember Preston 75, a reference to Jones' murder." And George Oldfield convinced himself that the tapes and the letters were genuine, and of course they weren't.
Talking to detectives, what did you find out about Christopher Smith, the man?
Well, he was born Alexander Smith in Londonderry in 1947, had a lot of aliases. Even as a boy, he frightened his own family with his explosions of violence. He was a petty criminal, he was an alcoholic, and you saw he killed his first wife, he almost killed his second wife, he kidnapped and threatened to kill his third wife. I mean, a frightening character.
Truly. What do you make of the deathbed confession?
Well, it was quite self-serving. It was all about him, the guilt he'd carried, how much he loved his family, how he'd been out of trouble for the last 20 years. Actually, the police and his family say the violence never stopped right to the end. You know, sometimes justice can be less than perfect. He escaped prison, but for Jones' family, at least they now know who killed her. And I suppose that's something.
Okay. Thanks, Matthew. Now, we've just got time for final updates on tonight's calls with Rav.
Wow, they've been really, really busy tonight. Let's start with the Betty Brown suspicious death, the grandmother from Edinburgh. We've had a number of calls and texts coming in, but importantly, a witness has come forward from the bus. The police wanted to identify a witness from there. They've come forward and explained who they are, so let's hope that leads to something encouraging there. Brighton rape next. Valentine's Day 2011, 30+ calls come forward. They're coming in thick and fast. 2 possible names put forward for the person in the CCTV that the police want to identify. Lots of information about the phrase cliche that could possibly be Eastern European for shut up or be quiet. Still need more names though. Remember, there's forensic evidence, so they can eliminate very, very easily. Now, I've just got time to tell you that one of our cases has already resulted in someone in custody. To find out who that is, join us in the Update Show.
Right, well, pretty incredible. That's everything for now. Details on all of tonight's cases, including the full reconstructions, are, of course, on the website, bbc.co.uk/Crimewatch. We're not going to be away for long. Next week, we have got a special episode of Crimewatch on the Streets, where we investigate the criminal networks that use slave labour to make millions. That's next Tuesday at 10:35 right here on BBC One. You should check listings for some regional variations. Then Rav is going to be with you every weekday for Crimewatch Roadshow. That starts on the 6th of June. Remember, the phone lines do stay open until midnight tomorrow, so there's still plenty of time to call. We're going to be back again 35 minutes after the news with an update. Do join us then if you can. For now, bye-bye.